It's Hockey Prospect Radio with ECAC Hockey, the leaders of hockey on and off the ice. Learn more at ecachockey.com. I'm with right now is first year head coach, Princeton University Tigers, in Ben Syer. Ben, thank you very much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me.
Well, you've had an interesting journey. You're a Canadian, fellow Canadian like myself, from the Kitchener region in Ontario. You went to Western Ontario and then went to grad school, Ohio U as well. But you really cut your teeth in the ECAC. First off, obviously, with Rand and in Quinnipiac, and really building up a phenomenal program that has, I think, everybody not only in the ECAC but in college hockey and across any other program, whether it be junior or college, to look what that program became and winning the national championship. That's really impressive as well. And then obviously going over to Cornell for 13 years, and then you just stayed in the ECAC now with the Princeton Tigers. So talk a little bit about that journey and why you chose to stay in the ECAC, because you could have went almost anywhere as a head coach, but you chose to stay where your home really is.
I think just so when Princeton had reached out, there's obviously a great deal of familiarity with the league. Obviously, I'd spent 25 years in the league. Also, my family's connected to this area and its surroundings. So that makes it a very easy move as well too from a family standpoint. But I think most importantly, when you look at the quality of institutions that the ECAC has, along with the programs from the athletic side of things and the hockey side of things, it's really second to none. And so to be able to have an opportunity to coach at Princeton is certainly one that I'm extremely grateful for and certainly very excited about as well.
One of the things I'd like to get your thoughts on, because you have a background in player development, and obviously you would go out and do a lot of the recruiting, with your time in Cornell and Quinnipiac, and talk about those conversations going into the living room with young men and their families, and especially when you're recruiting into Canada, where maybe those families are not familiar with not only college hockey but the ECAC from that standpoint, and trying to educate them not only on the value of the academic institutions that you're representing, but also looking at it from a hockey standpoint of developing players and what their young men can turn into by coming to your team as a head coach, or what you were as an assistant coach.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is that really appreciating the more so than just the value of the education, but the opportunity to be able to have now access to an alumni network at these varying institutions within the league, and certainly at Princeton, that is so well traveled. It's not just a local area university, but to be able to explain that to families that if their son wants to return home, or maybe they end up in another part of the world, that their degree will travel and give them great opportunity. And while getting a world class education, you can achieve and develop your passion as a player, because I think what sometimes people forget is the blueprint of the ECAC is really, it's in the heart of the American League teams. There's tons of NHL teams that are very close. So why that's important is scouts, assistant GMs have a great accessibility to our arenas. And then ultimately, even with the American League teams, because it's extremely difficult for players to get right to the NHL. Guys are very local to many American League teams too. So it's a great fit just from a hockey standpoint as well. And I think I guess the last piece would be just the development and the amount of time that we're able to spend with the players, working not just in practice, but in small groups and doing video and things like that with them is certainly able to enhance their development.
I'm glad you brought that up about the recruiting process, because there's recruiting that you have to do to build out your rosters, 1 and 2 and 3 years moving forward, but also the potential future recruitment of the players after they've finished, hopefully finished their degree at Princeton. I'm
Sure.
always an advocate because I'm in a PhD program, an advocate for higher education. I want to see all the hockey players finish their degrees. It's a representative of the
Sure.
hockey industry. But then, as you had mentioned, there's GMs, assistant GMs, heads of pro scouting for NHL teams that have to fulfill their American League roster and potentially their NHL roster, and looking for young men who are potentially, 22, 21, 22, 23 years old, who have finished their degree and they're not boys anymore. Now they're accomplished young men who have finished their degrees and are ready to move on to pro hockey. And some of the conversations I've had with the NHL staff is why they like recruiting out of the ECAC is we don't have to worry about those players because they're self-disciplined. And if you can get through the academics of a Princeton University or any other ECAC, we're not worried about leaving, like having you live on your own and handle the first year rigors of the American Hockey League, for example, as a pro. Talk about those conversations you have not only with the parents, but then, it's subsequent with having that with the NHL personnel as well.
Yeah, well, and I think too, when you talk about like the personnel in the NHL, I mean, we have NHL GMs that are like Chris Patrick is the GM of the Capitals is an alum. Brent Flair, the assistant GM with the Flyers, is also a Princeton alum. So like there's those connections. So those executives are familiar with the grind of the academic. I shouldn't even call it the grind, but the familiarity with the
Oh, it's a
combination
grind.
of of the academic piece with the hockey component. And I think what I think parents really probably don't fully realize, and I think the older I get, probably the more that I realize that how important this is that it's great if you can make the NHL, and everybody aspires to be in the NHL, and quite often that contract's going to be a handsome amount of money or handsome salary, so that they'll take care of a lot of things. But the American League is still a grind, and one of the things the executives don't have to worry about them, but in a lot of cases, because of the education and the opportunities that are afforded, the players that are graduating, they're able to do some consulting work on the side. So you go to practice in the morning. You do everything you need to do as a player, but then you're able to also do a little consulting work, enhancing your marketability when your playing days are done. So you can kind of you're not taking away from your hockey, but you're also now planning for a future that may happen 5-6 years from now, by doing some consulting work and using that education while still playing.
See, I'm glad you brought that up because, one of the things I think there's an advantage of playing the ECAC is that's a high level of academic standard that you have to uphold, particularly as a student athlete. And yeah, between being an athlete and then your academics, that is a grind. And what I think it really helps in terms of, you look at it from a player development standpoint, it helps players build up their grit factor, mental and
Mhm.
emotional grit, and becoming self-disciplined, understanding sometimes there's things that you have to do but you don't want to do it. Can you make yourself do it? Or are there things that you want to do but you're not supposed to do it? Can you stop yourself from doing it? And that balance, if I was a general manager in the NHL and I'm filling out my American League roster, I would seriously be looking at the ECAC because of the emotional mental maturity and the grit factor that those players are going to have.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the balance the players that I've coached over the years that they've either learned or they've established, it's second to none. There's very few uh pro teams that have ever had a bad experience because of what you just talked about is the balance they show. They know the importance of taking care of themselves, not just away from the rink, but also being able to enhance their mind to stay busy. I think it's so important.
100%. I think one of the things is makes ECAC athletes like more attractive to NHL team and pro teams, even in Europe, is that they're low maintenance. And I think that really matters in terms of like not having to manage those players, and those players, if they need help, they'll ask, but they're responsible enough to understand what they need to do as a professional. And I think the ECAC helps them in that regard as well, like on and off the ice as a leader. So, Ben, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Good luck in your first season as a head coach in Princeton, and look forward to seeing you at the rink.
Shane, really appreciate your time here, and definitely look forward to connecting again here soon.
We're going to take a short break on Hockey Prospect Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.